All right, moving on with drugs for rheumatoid arthritis, we're going to look at some DMARDs, disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs, and I don't have the foggiest idea why these DMARDs aren't in the textbook, because they are still being used. They are used very commonly, and I don't get it, but we're going to have to switch to the ATI book. So the first one we're going to look at is a drug called hydroxychloroquine. You can see the QUIN. It is a derivative of quinine. Hydroxychloroquine is one, chloroquine is another. And in ATI, they're discussed on pages 241 to 242. These drugs, just coincidentally, are getting a lot of publicity right now because it is said that they might have some effective action against the COVID-19 virus. That is not for sure at all. It shows some promise in actual cases, but there has not been a lot of double-blind placebo trials, right now, because we have the situation we have. And unfortunately, people who really need hydroxychloroquine are unable to get it in some cases because other people are accessing it for coronavirus, and it's difficult to get. A former student of mine with an autoimmune disorder, not rheumatoid arthritis, but another one, couldn't get her hydroxychloroquine for well over a week because none was coming into her drugstores nearby, because apparently it had been acquired by persons unknown who might have been using it for prevention or treatment of COVID-19. She had to wait quite a while at great personal discomfort until she could get it. So it's a very controversial issue right now. Hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine were originally anti-malaria drugs. And the reason they came to somebody's attention as rheumatoid arthritis drugs was because people were taking it to prevent and treat malaria. And it was found that they noticed their arthritis improved. And so now it is a pretty common drug many times for particularly rheumatoid arthritis, as well as other autoimmune disorders like lupus. They're not really sure how it works. They just know that it somehow stops antigen formation in the body. The inflammatory response mechanism is interrupted by this drug. And where it's used in this particular case is rheumatoid arthritis that has gotten worse in spite of other therapies the person might have had. It is not an easy treatment, and it is not a fast treatment. Many times a person might have to take it for 3 months before they even notice the first improvement. And it's recommended that if 6 months go by and no improvement is noticed, that the person just stops, because if it's not working by 6 months, it's not going to work. So certainly it's not anything that's a quick and easy fix for rheumatoid arthritis. Now, the biggest problem with chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine is that it has some nasty side effects. There are reports of people who've taken it for malaria and people who are taking it experimentally for COVID-19 that they've had to stop it because of cardiac irregularities. And I don't know if you remember, but we talked about other drugs derived from quinine that are actually taken for cardiac irregularities. It's kind of hard to say. And it has been known to show signs and symptoms of quinine overdose for people taking it for cardiac issues. Now, the main side effect that people have to know about when they're taking it for skeletal issues like RA is retinopathy. It's a very rare but serious adverse effect, and it can cause retinal damage. So before a person even gets on hydroxychloroquine, they need to have a baseline eye exam. with an ophthalmologist, not just, you know, the optometrist down the road. And then they need to have exams every 6 months thereafter. If there is any sign of eye damage whatsoever, such as blurred vision, the person is told to stop the med, because the retinal damage can be permanent if the drug is not stopped at the first sign of trouble. Hydroxychloroquine can also cause some cornea irregularities, although that usually will regulate itself once the drug is discontinued. The drug effectiveness varies. Drug interactions vary. Requires a lot of education and a lot of really close monitoring. The next drug we're going to look at for rheumatoid arthritis that is not covered in the textbook is a drug called sulfasalazine, and just by the first two syllables, sulfa, you know that it's going to be somewhat related to other drugs that people have taken at other times that we've talked about. This is also discussed on pages 241 to 242 in ATI, and I encourage you to look at those. It is also a DMARD. It modifies the disease, and it's used for RA and ulcerative colitis. The reason that it can be effective against ulcerative colitis is it doesn't really do anything until it gets into the colon. And when bacteria in the colon get to the medication, it's broken down into chemicals that the body can then use to reduce the actions of prostaglandins that are causing inflammation. Lots of side effects, mostly GI, which makes sense because the GI tract is where it breaks down. So it's common for people to have nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and abdominal pain. It's recommended that they use enteric-coated preparations so that it breaks down in the large intestine, not prior to that. Excuse me. Adverse effects can be damage to the liver, so liver function tests are needed. It can also cause bone marrow suppression. It can affect the person's CBC and platelets. Lots and lots of drug interactions for these. So this is one of those where you sit down with the drug information, you look at what the patient is already taking, and then see how it's going to interact with the sulfasalazine and what can be done about it. Once again, they're not going to get really great improvement in every case. Some people find that they get good improvement, others not so much, and they have to watch out for allergic reactions. So people who don't do well with sulfa antibiotics and the other sulfonamide drugs probably are not going to react too well with sulfasalazine either. Next drug we're going to look at that's commonly used for RA is a drug called methotrexate, and I know you've heard that before. It is mostly associated with cancer chemotherapy. This is also discussed on pages 241 and 242 in the ATI book, also considered one of the disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs. Once again, not really sure completely how it does what it does, but they know it affects immune function and reduces inflammation. It's mostly used for treatment of cancer, but it is pretty useful in some cases of rheumatoid arthritis, and usually it's one of those where they've tried everything else for RA, it has not been responsive, and so they bring in methotrexate as kind of a last-ditch effort. Very, very toxic, as you can imagine, because it is a cancer drug. It's a chemotherapy drug. The reason it works in cancer is that it kills rapidly developing cells. You know, the kind for hair follicles and the lining of your GI tract. And that's why your hair falls out and you have such severe nausea and vomiting with chemotherapy. So it's a pretty heavy-duty drug. When they talk about the toxicity, they say high possibility of severe adverse reactions, including death. So that just makes you real eager to jump right on that. It can be toxic to the bone marrow. It can damage liver and kidneys, and it can do some lung damage too. If the person responds well to it, it can take as long as 6 weeks to start reducing that joint swelling and tenderness. It does not cause the disease to stop, or it does not repair bone that's already eroded, but sometimes it can, I should say it doesn't cause remission where the condition goes away completely, but it can stop the progression of the rheumatoid arthritis. All right, we're going to talk about actual immune modulators, but I'm going to stop here and come back to those.